question for Ben. I'm going to put him on the spot. No, so in the very few like online webcomics I've done, I wrote the script and then an artist did things. And as far as I recall, you generally have not collaborated on writing before our project, right? So one of the things I enjoy, given that he's not done this before, I think it's hilarious that he has done this in the script, is every now and again, if he's the person who's drafting that particular draft, we'll come across something where he just throws in notes to me and notes to Michelle that are often horrifying and terrible and like, just kidding, we're not going to do this, I'm not that terrible. And it's literally just for our own amusement. And so that's one of the things I like about collaborating with Ben. But Ben, having done a number of comics, what is it like now working together?
It's
if
fun.
He says bad things, I'm going to...
No, I joke that Emily and I, since we live on opposite sides of the country, so the time zone thing has been fun to work through. And Emily is extremely enthusiastic all the time. And so it's a part of it. It's almost impossible not to be excited about what you're working on. You'd like to think you're always excited about what you're working on anyway, but in this case, it's impossible not to be because just that level of enthusiasm working through it. And so it's not uncommon for when I get for me, it'll be like say 4:30 in the morning. So, but I get that first buzz on my phone at 4:30 in the morning, and I wake up just enough to go, okay, here it comes. And then 75 buzzes later, as a series of texts come through of ideas of stuff that she's kind of run across. But that's been fun. Like, so there's no danger of running out of ideas of what to do in any particular scene or plot line because it's just a constant source of information and ideas from her. So it's been a lot of fun to kind of collaborate that way. But I've enjoyed it a lot.
I try to keep it in check, but when I find like a science thing that I really like, or if I suddenly am like, hey, I read what you did here and now these two characters have got to have a relationship or something like that. You know, we like something where we're seeing it develop and going, ooh, had an idea and he's got the next pen on the thing. So I have to tell him the idea if I want to see that first bit come back to me. I will occasionally forget what time it is in Portland. And I will text, not 75 times, but maybe 3 or 4, and then I'll go,
75, I might be underestimating, but all right. Agree to disagree.
Well, I will say, we have a lot of, we have a lot of like 10-minute disagreements where we're like, I really think it should be this, I really think it should be this, and then somebody goes, okay, you're right. And like we haven't really fought yet, which is fortunate. But I really appreciate working with Ben because he has more experience than I do in the longer form drafting. Anything I've scripted before has been like a 9-panel webcomic or something. Or memorably, I did one that was Deadpool Presents the Oscars, and so it was like a very long webcomic about all the different awards. But it's been just me for like a page, you know? And so Ben has a great sense of the structure and the dynamics of the story and the dialogue. And so as we plot things out, it's really helped me to know what his process is, and I've been learning from Ben. And also collaborating can keep you on a schedule more than if you're working on your own. Now, some people don't need it. He's like a machine over here, and he just does stuff all the time. But especially Ben and I are both full-time in other careers, and so it helps a lot to have somebody else who's enthusiastic, because you know we're both enthusiastic we're all enthusiastic about this. So it helps, and Michelle as well, and Tom being like, oh, we need this by this time to keep it on our schedule, and that helps me a lot to have a little more structure.
So I guess the flip side question to the writer collaboration is, what do you, all three of you, I guess, look for in artist collaboration? What do you appreciate? What do you look for? What elements do you think are key when working together?
Well, you start.
Well, when I write My Little Pony script, I have to keep in mind who the audience is, and not the script itself. The audience is not the reader. The audience is my artist, and a lot of times Hasbro. So I need to keep that in mind. But because I know a lot of times what artists I'm working with, I can throw stuff in for them that I know will be there. I apologize to my artists a lot, where I said, so this panel has this page has 16 panels, and I know what I'm asking for, but there's going to be a full page spread later on that you're going to be able to sell the original art for. So I put that in for you too. Like I'm conscious of the things that I'm asking them to do. And I like when I get a little bit of pushback. Tony Felice on My Little Pony will actually call me out and say, you can make that joke funnier. And I would be mad at him if he wasn't right every time he did it. It doesn't happen very often, to be honest, but I appreciate that kind of just like quick honesty and somebody else who's like watching out and making sure that you have those guardrails. And like I said, giving them the space to do what they do, and then when there's a very specific thing I have in mind, doing that. Because the important part to me in working in any collaboration is the communication, to know that there's a reason why they're asking for that, and if you see a problem with what they're asking for, you can still figure out what they're trying to do and how to get to where they want to go, even though it may not be the destination either one, or the path that either one of you intended on. Some of that comes from, I know I was a graphic designer. But in that, I had to deal with a lot of clients who didn't know what art was, or they didn't know the terminology, so a lot of times they're like, I don't like it because it makes me look dishonest. I'm like, you don't like it because the letters are slanted, and you think that makes you look crooked, which my hand to God happened once. But it's being able to drill down and figure out what they're trying to say and what they mean to get them what they're looking for.
I do think communication is really important, and I'm going to answer the artist part of it, but also one of the things when I say Ben and I don't really like fight about stuff, we will have the disagreements where there will be emails back and forth that I'm like, this one specific thing is bothering me, and then we have a couple of communications where we're kind of like, oh, but it's this, and then one of us will explain in detail our thought process behind why this like 2 words is not right, and then the other one will be like, oh, now I understand what you're looking at, and then even if the tweak isn't exactly what was suggested at first, it'll be tweaked to something that makes both of us happy. So in the writer aspect, that's very important. In the artist aspect, one of the things I really appreciate about Michelle is she's very good about saying, okay, this is how I work. This is what I need you to do in terms of like feedback and timing and these parts of the, chapter 1, chapter 2, these pages, I'm going to be doing this at this time, and like has a very specific schedule because obviously she also has a full-time other job. And so like it's really helpful to me, and I've had to get used to it. I'm sorry, Michelle. I've learned from everybody here. I've learned a lot about lettering. I've learned about the artist process more. And this is as someone who's reported on creators for years, but doing it as a different aspect. And Michelle has been patient with my learning process. I think we've got it figured out more now. But I appreciate that communication and the feedback about like, okay, this is what I need and this is what will help me. At this stage in the process, at thumbnails, you can give me a lot of feedback. When we're at the inks process or the coloring stage, if you need to change like a mouth movement, that's okay. But if you're changing like 15 pages, I'm going to kill you and roast you and serve you to unsuspecting people. She's never said that, but I suspect she's thinking it. But also one of the things I really appreciate about I've worked with a different artist on the webcomics, and both the artists that I've worked with so far, they add to the story, they make the story better. We'll have something in our heads, and then the layout will come back, and it'll be something really cool that I would have not imagined. There's at least a few, like 2 or 3 pages in the book. I mean, more than that have great layouts, but 2 or 3 where the layout was just so striking, and I would never have thought of it at all. And it just looks way better than what my, a panel here, a panel there, boxes would be. And then like little details that Michelle throws in. She thinks up things on her own that are going to fit into the story and are going to distinguish we have a lot of hamsters in our book, so give them distinguishing characteristics. And we'll provide like details on what kind of hamsters they are, and she'll go and look it up and figure it out and like be specific to what we need, but also throw in her own good tweaks and everything, and I really appreciate the balance of being like, the story has to be served in this way, but the art can go beyond that to whatever extent still makes sense, So what about you, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, just from a pure ego perspective, I'd like an artist who makes me look better than I am, and Michelle's very good at that. And yeah, the communication is certainly key, but for me, I'm unlike, say, Tom, I'm not very visually oriented at all. And so as a writer, I have to, for every page that I do, I break it down into thumbnails to make sure, generally speaking, what I'm asking fits, and that I'm not making the mistake like asking for 2 different things. And it does help me to sit there and draw it out and go, this is not possible to do. Okay, back up and rework what I'm trying to get across here. But still, for me, not being visually oriented, the how I structure a page tends to be pretty basic and boring, because that's the best I'm ever going to do as an artist is basic and boring. And so I really appreciate when an artist will take those sort of panel compositions and really make that flow be really interesting and fun to look at, whereas I would just be doing blocks set out on the page. And there's a few points in the book, early on in the book, there's a scene where you're sort of meeting all the hamsters. They're sitting around a table, and there's a lot of information that's being sort of given to the reader all at once. So it's a lot of dialogue. They're all sitting around. It's a lot of faces all at once. And as drafted by me, it's just a bunch of squares all in a row. And it's boring, but the information's there. It's just not a whole lot of fun to look at. And it was one of the first pages, and it was really exciting to see that come back from Michelle, because it had all these really cool flow moments of one hamster pushing with a spear, and then the spear flows into the next panel, and then something falls next. So it's just really neat to read on a page that, as a reader, you may not even realize how well that's working. It's almost like invisible, but also that's the kind of thing that it reads really well, and so you might think, oh, the writer really did a great job here, and the truth is not at all. I just info dumped, and Michelle, made that page suddenly look really nice.
Sometimes you do okay, Ben. I mean, sometimes. I think I do okay
it's
sometimes.
Real rare.
We're okay. No, but it's true. It is true.
I really do appreciate that, because it's not a skill set that I have, and the pages would often come across as looking like boring grids, but for an artist, having the eye to turn that into something really fun to look at. So I really appreciate it when an artist can bring that to the table, because I can't.
Yeah, I have a couple of other thoughts that came to mind. One is Michelle also designed this amazing cover, which is very striking. I mean, she did like two or three options, I think it was, but she was really into okay, let's figure out how to make this the best thing, and it's just gorgeous, beautiful, and it has everything. It's got the water, because that's part of it, and it's got these glowing mushrooms that are a big interesting thing in our book, and it's got one of our leader hamster, and it's just one of those things where you look at it and you're like, oh, I would see that in a bookstore and I would pick it up. And that, I don't even know for the first cover if we had any suggestions. We might have, but Michelle,
some really bad ones your way.
We might have thrown her something, but she came up with 3 really beautiful options, and this was one of them. And it's really great to have someone who can look at the packaging aspect of it too, and come up with something like this. And I also appreciate, because of some of the science in the book, and because of where it's set, and because I'm local and I like to be super detailed about stuff like that, I will tell Michelle, so this is the kind of tree, here's a link to it, here's a tree, this is the kind of breed of animal, and this is the specific, they're this big, and this is what's going on. And sometimes it's actually very relevant to the plot, how big the animal is, and sometimes it's more, I want it to look like where it's set, because it's a fictional world, but it's actually based in a lot of, from a writing perspective, if you were to measure where the hamsters travel, that's actually true. It's measured in a different measurement, it's hamster measurements, but they actually correspond to human measurements, and I went on Google Maps and plotted out exactly how far can hamsters travel, and how fast do they run, and how fast do humans run, and how can they get to this place in this amount of time. But in the same way, I throw these things at Michelle, and she goes for it and puts them in where we specify.
I will say that that's something that, if you could describe Emily in a couple words, detail-oriented will definitely be in there. But that's something I appreciate, because I'm not science-minded. It's why I do art, because I would fail as a scientist or a mathematician or anything else like that. So having someone who has the mind for the research and being able to go in and say, these are actually scientifically backed facts, I'll be like, I believe you, because I know you did that reading. I know you did that, and you're going to link me to everything that is going to be as accurate as possible.
Yeah, and you want to bring your artist, you don't want to surprise your artist. You don't want to have them get to page 24 and say, oh, that shadowy figure turns out to be this character. When, oh, well, I could have made it look more like that character if I knew. Your artist is telling the story, so even though the temptation is to write it as if it's a narrative story, you need to bring the artist in so that they know what things you're building up and why this hat rack in this panel is important, because it's going to be a big deal later.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing that I want to circle back to the cover is that the cover wasn't completely done by me. I did the art, but the Lion Forge team is incredible, and
That's
they
true.
have designers who did the logo, which I tried. They were like, "We'll take care of it." I'm like, "That's fair." And they did, the spot gloss, and they made sure that everything is legible and looks fantastic. So when they sent us the final composite of the cover, we were all blown away. So when we say that comics are a collaborative process, it's not just the people at the table, it's the people at Lion Forge, the editors, the marketers, the salespeople. It is truly a collaborative process.
Yeah, and we should. Oh,
No, go ahead.
We should definitely touch on that for a minute. By the way, I will say, if there is some kind of inaccurate science thing in the book, I'm sorry. I'm not actually a scientist, but I just really like weird science. So I've done as much research as I can as a non-scientist. We have consulted with some people, but if you're a scientist and you see something in the book and you're like, that's totally wrong, feel free to tell us, but just try to be nice about it, because I'm trying over here. But yeah, no, I do love that stuff. But it is very important to recognize that our publishing team, our editors, and the marketing team and the packaging group and everything have been really great. Like the inside layout of the book, in the sense that the chapter headers and where everything is placed, like we all worked together on making sure we thought everything was in a good place, and they came up with the chapter headers and as Michelle said, the logo. And then when we wanted to start advertising with it, they sent it to us so we could put it on stuff and use it and get it out there. And it's really important to do that. And our editors are great and will come back to us with the right kind of comments. And by that I mean they will say, there's copy editing, there's errors that you might make, but they'll come back and say, these 3 places in the story, either there's too much going on or I'm confused about what's going on. And we'll see where, that's in our heads, but we didn't quite put the whole of it in the story yet, and then we'll go back and work on it some more. And Ben, you probably have something to say about that.
Yeah, we were actually pretty fortunate. We wound up with Lion Forge, took the book very seriously, and wound up with two levels of editing process, just at the story, never mind copy editing, just from story editing. And I've made the joke before, 100% this is true. It doesn't matter if it's a book or for prose or comic. For me, 100% of the time, I get back editor notes and I close my computer and want to set the house on fire and storm out and say, I sent you a masterpiece. Why would you criticize this in any way? Obviously I'm right. And I take a deep breath and I just learn, I go out, I have a drink, I come back the next day and open it. Yeah, I text furiously to everybody else I know.
It's true,
somebody
he does.
said that I didn't make a master. And then I the next day I reopen it and I go, okay, actually this is all right. Okay, fine. And invariably, a good editor levels you up. That's their job. Their job isn't actually to make you feel like an idiot, even though they sometimes do. What their job is to level up your book. And I think that we've been very lucky with a team that did a really good job of multiple times a scene that I felt really strong about, came back and they had really good comments, and after making some edits went, okay, you're right, this is a leveled up scene. This does in fact work better.
One thing that I would suggest studying is cinematography, and I know that sounds weird because you're like, that's movies, but if you look at the concept of every frame as a painting, so basically when you look at storyboarding or cinematography, you can kind of see how they flow in and out of cuts, basically. So you're looking at thinking of it as storyboarding something in your brain. Does that make sense? So I would suggest definitely looking at that concept. So every frame is a picture. And gosh, I'm trying to think of any other resources. Scott McCloud has been around forever. Will Eisner.
Yeah, Will Eisner did sequential art. That one's really good.
So
Will Eisner, sequential art and storytelling.
Yeah. So those are definitely a lot of resources to read about. Paneling is hard. It's probably one of the hardest parts. People think that thumbnails are just, crappy drawings that you throw down on the page. I lose sleep over thumbnails because I'm like, is this actually going to convey movement and convey the story? And sometimes I thumbnail and then I get to the pencil stage and I'm like, this is garbage, I'm scrapping this. And so I tell them, like, this is a completely different layout, because as I was drawing it, I thought, this is this is not working how I want it to. But it's really just a lot of practice and read other people's comics, but don't just read from one genre, read from multiple genres. For example, I really like how a lot of manga artists panel because it's a lot of visual storytelling instead of verbal storytelling. So just broaden your horizons. And
often just reading whatever thing I'm reading, and we'll see a page and think, oh, the way this worked is a really, and I'll just tear that page out and set aside, just to remind myself.
You're a savage.
No, it's
We're
all right.
designing him now.
Buy another
Sorry,
copy.
guys.
Buy another copy. He gets
Take a
paid.
picture
He
with
gets
your phone,
no. That's
right?
insane. You tear it off. You pin it up. Buy another copy if you want to support the. But
Wait, like this one?
But for me, that's a good way to go back and go. Oh, remind yourself of a good idea when you see it.
Also, just something I know that Michelle does is puts the word, like kind of example word balloons into the frame so that we can see what she's thinking about her layout in some of the early layouts, which is helpful.
Yeah, and thinking about your word balloons really helps the flow of your page because that's the order in which people have to read things.
yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Sure. So everyone has a different answer for this, and I know that's not a great answer. For me, I started off with Photoshop. Which is not viable for a lot of people because they move to a monthly subscription that's incredibly expensive. Right now, I use Clip Studio Paint that is really affordable. It goes on sale all the time for $25. They have updates constantly. It's the program that I found can mimic real media as well as any other program I've used. They have incredible resources on their website, and they also have my favorite thing, which is the perspective tool, because if you're like me, you suck at perspective, and you can just drop a ruler down and it will help you do 2, 3, 4 point perspective, which has really improved my artwork over time. I do still use Photoshop for coloring just because that's what I'm used to. It's what I've used for the last 12 to 15 years. But Clip Studio Paint is a stellar piece of software for next to nothing. So it's definitely something I would suggest using.
But
Yeah,
What about that?
Clip Studio Paint is my favorite thing ever. It's built just for comic book artists. So you're not taking a piece of software and making it do what you want it to. It's built to do what you want it to. Like my setup is I have a Power Mac and a Cintiq. And I draw directly on the Cintiq. On the iPad, I use a program called Procreate. There's a version of Clip Studio for the iPad, but I don't like it as much. I don't know if you've played with it at all.
I don't use Apple products.
Oh.
You can hate me now.
Oh, what?
So don't use Apple
fighting.
products. Destroys comic books.
We're all getting fired after this.
Yeah.
The end of collaboration in comics right here.
But if you use an iPad, Procreate's a really reasonably priced thing, and I can do a lot of my work on that and then export it to Clip Studio or Photoshop to finish it up. So that's great for it, too.
And another thing about tablets, Cintiqs are great because you can draw on the screen and see actually what you're working on, but Wacom and a lot of other companies now have tablets that don't have the screen on it, but you can still draw and get the pressure sensitivity. It won't show up on your screen, so you just have to get used to looking here but drawing here, so you look like a weirdo. You're just like, oh my god, what's happening?
I had the very first original Wacom power.
Yeah.
It was no more than, I think, 8 by 8.
Yep,
Yeah.
sounds about right.
Like,
Super tiny.
it's super tiny. And,
Yeah.
I tried okay, I got it, wait.
It takes a lot of practice. I mean, I really mean that. If you start off with a tablet, I mean, a lot of people just think, yeah, I can do this, and you hold it for the first time, and you're like, I cannot do this. This is horrible. Just keep going. It takes a lot of practice, but just keep going.
Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. Our version probably isn't very helpful. She had reviewed a comic that I had written and had a Twitter feed that was based on one of her hamsters. So I reached out to thank her as another hamster, and we just talked back and forth on Twitter as hamsters for a while, and then separately decided we might want to make a comic out of it. So that probably doesn't work for everyone.
But I have had a lot of good, interesting things happen because of different social media interactions or just appreciating someone else's work. So in the broader aspect, getting to know other people in the creative industry, looking at what they're doing, talking to them about it, coming to panels like this and asking questions and seeing how things work, those are actually very helpful. And I've met people through Twitter. I've run events that started because I talked to someone on Twitter. So that can help, or like cons like this. But Ben, what else were you going to say?
Yeah, and there's certainly online resource. I don't know, is Pencil Jack even still a thing? Is that?
I don't know. I was thinking digital webbing. I can't
Yeah.
remember if digital webbing's still around.
Yeah, there are definitely online DeviantArt, I guess, still slower as, but
Yeah.
there's definitely places like DeviantArt. It used to be called Pencil Jack, another place. That may not exist anymore, but there's certainly websites where artists will just post material, and I've met a number of artists that I've collaborated with by just going on to places like DeviantArt and finding stuff that I kind of liked, and then emailing back and forth a bit and deciding if it might be a good creative fit. Cons are also, you wander around cons and meet
Yeah.
folks and shake their hands and see who's interested in potential projects, and it can be a way to collaborate as well.
Well, and I the few webcomics that I did do, I found the artist on DeviantArt because he was doing other Deadpool referential comics, and I had one in mind, and I was like, do you want to do one? And then we did that one. We did some other ones that weren't about Deadpool, But that's how, yeah, I mean, that was a few years ago, and I don't know how vibrant DeviantArt still is. I think it's still there, but I don't know how you do that. But yeah, that's how I met another one of the artists I worked with.
Probably a Tom question.
I was gonna say we'll let Tom deal with this
Yeah.
one, but the only thing I'll say to start is it depends what kind of comic you're trying to develop. But he can talk to the Webtoons thing.
Yeah, I think putting your stuff online is great. Webtoon is a great place to go. They have a discover level where you can start putting things up, and then if you get enough people, you get moved up to featured. They have ad revenue systems built in. It's kind of designed like YouTube, where if you put a YouTube video up and there's advertising, you get a cut of that. So there are so many places to put things, but what I like about digital is that you don't have to pay for printing, you don't have to pay for distribution, you can get it out there. The other stuff I would say is, I would say aim low. It's really easy to, the very first project I did was called Raider, and you've never heard of it, and it was going to be like my 15-volume magnum opus, and I did 3 of them because my battle plan did not survive contact with the enemy. And then the next thing I did was much shorter. So think in terms of like manageable bursts, because it's going to be a little more involved than you think it is. But yeah, just get stuff out there. You can always, the nice thing about digital too is it's iterative. You can keep changing it. So you're going to get better. Just accept the idea that you will get better.
Well, and also I'm not an artist, but from the artist perspective, I hear a lot of them say, get an Instagram account, put some of your art out there and show people, what you can do. It's a little harder to do that with scripts, but that's one way to kind of, get your work out on the internet and then maybe get, some attention for that kind of thing.
I will add, and Tom has a lot of experience with Webtoon. I've done a couple things for Webtoon as well. I will add for that, it's a great resource to put stuff up there, but the way it's formatted and the scripting is going to be very different than how you're probably scripting for a lot of other things. So if you decide to do Webtoons, you're going to be writing for that platform specifically. It's a very different way to write.
Or you have to think through that because Warning Label is designed to turn back into a print book real easy, but I had to figure that out, and there were definite constraints upon what I could do. So Webtoon's that infinite vertical scroll format. So depending on what you want to do, it may also not be the right place for it.
Yeah. It's definitely a learning curve.
Yeah, you can't do sweeping vistas on Webtoon.
You could do one that sweeps like all the way down, I guess, but you'd be like, they just keep scrolling to see what's next. But
That's a great question.
I don't sleep very much. No, I'm kidding. One thing is I commute to work here in the DC area, and I will do stuff on the metro because, that you fit it in, or I use my lunch hour, or I will, do stuff at home instead of going out sometimes. And obviously we have our lives. You don't want to stay in your home all the time. That's sad. But yeah, it's hard to structure, but also it also depends sort of like if Ben's got part of the script that he's tweaking and then he sends it back to me, like one of us is working on one part and one on the other, and then he might be working on the next bit, but we kind of pass back and forth, or like Michelle sends something in and I know she needs it in 2 days, so somehow you put it in there. I don't know if I am very detail oriented, so I'm pretty precise about certain things about how I do my day, but lunch hours and metro trips and whatever else you can fit in, and walking and texting, sadly, don't do it when you're crossing streets, but I do a lot of that, and so.
I drink a lot of coffee.
I drink no coffee.
See? Everything's going to take longer than you think, so get used to that. So don't build yourself with no margins, and everybody's going to take longer than you think to get back with you. Like, just factor that in. In a perfect world, it would take me 3 hours to do a page, but somebody's going to call, and texts are going to go back and forth, and then my cat's going to need to be fed. Like all these things are going to happen, which are going to take you off your game, and you have to figure that out. The best way to do it is to actually do it. But even then, when I letter comic books, I was working for a company called Claypool, and it would always take me 3 hours more than I thought to finish the job, no matter what I did. If I put 3 hours more into the time, it would still take me 3 hours more than that. And you just have to start banking that, but experience will help you with that.
Yeah. Don't be afraid just to block out the time. I mean, sometimes that sounds simple to do, but you just have to say, I'm off of Twitter for the next however long. If I have an hour right now after work, I'm going to take this hour and no Netflix, and this is just what you do, and you just have to make yourself do it. And that sounds really easy, but I know it's not.
No, it's hard.
Figure out what doesn't
really
distract
hard.
you.
Yeah.
I stay off Twitter a lot.
Yeah.
And if you're one of those people who's like, but I really enjoy this show that could be your reward if you do like your 2 hours on the script and then, okay, I'm really tired, now I get to watch an episode of Game of Thrones or whatever you're a fan of.
A trick I use, because I tend to, if I just feel like the end isn't in sight, I will find a way to distract myself. I listen to vinyl, usually soundtracks, because words will distract me while I'm writing. So the reward is I put on side A, and I will not do anything else except for write this until that record scratches, and I have to flip it over. But it gives me like it's an end goal. I know it's and it's blocks, but you find whatever trick you can do to make yourself work.
Yeah, and as long as you don't become too dependent on it, like I can write up at Panera because it's a trade-off. You are going to write, but then you also get to get lunch. But you have to write when you go there.
I do that occasionally.
You also don't want to make it so that you can only write at Panera because you might go somewhere that doesn't have one.
Yeah. And for me, it's a lot of scheduling. I have a spreadsheet that is color-coded, which is terrifying. And
Detail-oriented over there.
Yeah, but for me, it's scheduling. I have to schedule it. If I just say, oh, it's due in a month, that's never going to happen. I'm never going to finish that. But if I say, I need to finish this page this day, this page the next day, and I have that on my calendar, then that's how I get it done. I also know that I have to make time for myself, otherwise I'm going to burn out, and then the book's never going to finish. So knowing that I have an hour and a half to have dinner with my husband and try and cuddle my dog that hates being cuddled, an hour and a half after my day job before I start jumping into working on artwork, that is a reprieve that I need. But then I know that I'm going to work from 7 until 10:30 or 11 every day. And then on the weekends, I always set aside time for myself and doing fun stuff, but a good chunk of those days are going to be work. And if I didn't have that time set aside, nothing would get done. But everyone's different. Like maybe some people will want to be under the deadline of, finishing 10 inked pages in a day. I just need the regiment. So.
Yeah.
Probably
Unfortunately,
out of time,
I think we're out of time, but we are going to be selling and signing the book from 3:30 to 4 o'clock at Dan Govar's booth M09 on M09 on the Artist Alley floor. So if you haven't got it yet and you'd like to get a copy, please come by and see us. 3 of us will be signing. Michelle, unfortunately, has another commitment.
I have another panel if you guys want to go
Yes, that's true.
see me. I'm going to be down in the kids pavilion drawing monsters that kids describe, and they're going to be fighting other artists / monsters. So if you guys want to come see that down in the kid pavilion.
Do you need me there drawing?
What time
if you
does
can draw
that?
hamster monsters.
We don't want to terrify the
They're
kids.
already hamster monsters. Michelle,
They would
is yours
win
at
everyone?
is your panel at 3:30 or?
3:45.
3-4. So theoretically, you could swing by, get a book, and then go see Michelle. So there you go.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys,
Thank you guys
everyone,
for
for
coming out.
coming.